You ever watch a flood roll in? I don't mean on the news. I don't mean in some viral drone clip with dramatic music over it. I mean really watch it in person. Watch the clouds stack themselves like courtroom evidence over your head. Watch the wind get nervous. Watch the soil get soft like it's remembering. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ask permission. It just comes silent, slow, and sure. And when it does, the ones who thought they were in control always look the most surprised. Not about condos, not about real estate, not even about me. It's about control and what happens when people who worship paperwork forget that nature never signed the contract. You're about to hear something they never wanted you to hear, something buried under cement and smiling press releases. A truth that doesn't care how confident your engineers are or how polished your legal team looks in a courtroom. The lake? View condos weren't just a mistake. They were a monument to arrogance. And I didn't stop it, not because I couldn't, but because I remembered. I remembered what they chose to forget, what they were too proud, too rushed, or too greedy to study. A cycle, a rhythm, a warning, the kind that shows up in photo albums, not data charts, the kind that whispers in your ear if you've lived long enough to listen. See, most people think justice comes from lawsuits or angry Facebook posts. It comes with water rising slow and silent through the basements of $2.5 million lakefront dreams. I didn't sabotage them. I just stepped aside. I let the rain explain what I could not. So if you're looking for another HOA horror story, you're about to get one. But this one's different, because this one's real. And I learned that the only contract that really matters out here is the one you sign with the land. And if you break that, the land always collects, one way or another. So sit tight, because this isn't just a story, it's a reminder. And if you live near water, you'll want to listen closely. Asterisk, they called it progress. That's the word they always use, right? Progress, development, revitalization. As if pouring concrete over soil somehow makes it more valuable. As if steel beams and imported marble countertops make land more civilized. I heard all the buzzwords the day they broke ground. Economic growth, community enhancement, environmental integration. I stood on my porch and listened like a priest at a heretic sermon. They had no idea what they were waking up. See, I didn't start out angry. I wasn't looking for revenge. Hell, I didn't even want company. I just wanted to be left alone with my lake and my books and my boat. That little cabin had seen 20 years of sunrises, of quiet cups of coffee, of memories too fragile to pack into boxes. Then they showed up. The survey teams, the Lexus with the HOA Queen Bee, and the promises of luxury living. They told me it wasn't. Not legally, not technically. They pulled out the fine print, like it was a loaded weapon, and shot holes straight through my peace of mind. Page 23. The clause they'd waited for, 60% of the land reserved for community enhancement. Which, in HOA speak, means anything that turns a profit. I could feel it then, the shift. Like the wind before a storm, my oak trees got marked. My boat got fined. My bird feeders became a code violation. They weren't just building condos, they were erasing me. One memo, one orange spray paint X at a time. But what they didn't know, what Vivian Sterling never thought to ask, was that this land has its own memory. And neither do I, buried in a shoebox of old photos beneath. 2 decades of dust was proof. Proof of what happened in 1995. Back when this prime real estate was 10 feet underwater and every tree line wore a water stain like a scar. Charters, it just took back what was its eye. Didn't say a word to them then. Not yet. I needed to be sure, so I smiled. I played along. I poured them coffee and gave them advice. And all the while, I waited. Because when you've seen the flood once, you know it always comes again. You just have to be patient enough to let it find its way home. Asterisk patience is something city. Folk don't understand. They're addicted to urgency, same-day delivery, overnight approvals, 60-day closings. They build like time is chasing them, but out here, the land teaches a slower rhythm. That politicians smile and started hammering survey stakes into the soft earth near my dock. I didn't argue. I watched, I nodded, and I remembered she thought I was a lonely old man desperate for inclusion. She mistook my silence for surrender. Started asking my advice, where the best views were, which parts of the lake drew the most breeze, which spots sold the dream best. I gave her answers. Real ones, honest ones. Full-length basements, scenic walkouts, open patio space close to shore. She called me her local knowledge consultant. Her crew started calling me Lake Leo. She thought she'd won me over. But I wasn't helping her. I was helping the lake, because what she didn't understand, what none of them understood, is that this wasn't new ground. It was old ground pretending to be new. Ground that had already spoken, already swallowed. That shoreline they loved, it moved. Not on paper, but in the real world, with silt and wind and rainfall. That soil they poured their foundations into. It shifted when the rain came. The basements they were so proud of, I'd seen what happens to basements in a Texas flood. They fill first. The original surveyor back in the 70s had marked a high watermark carved into a stone near the edge of my property. Most folks never saw it. I hadn't even thought about it in years. On borrowed ground, and they were losing. The lake doesn't roar when it rises. It creeps. It seeps through concrete. It whispers at first, then takes. Always takes. I kept my photo of the 1995 flood taped inside my kitchen cabinet. Every morning, while I poured my coffee, I'd look at it. Not as a trophy, as a countdown, because I could feel it in the sky, in the ground, in my bones. The first real sign came on a Tuesday, late June. The sky had that strange copper tint, the kind that makes the birds go quiet. Most folks didn't notice, but I did. Out here, weather speaks its own language, and that day the air smelled like memory. Heavy, electric, like the kind of storm that doesn't knock politely, but breaks the door down. Vivian was giving another site tour that morning, leading some clients from Dallas through the freshly framed units near the eastern shoreline. She walked them right past the old oak stump, the one they'd bulldozed 2 weeks earlier, as they pointed at floor plans and gushed about lake vibes and investment potential. They had no idea they were standing on top of a grave, not of bones, but of history. They'd beaten nature with paperwork and pavers. That night, the NOAA alert hit my phone. Tropical depression forming in the Gulf. Unusual pressure patterns, possible stall conditions. I knew what that meant. Not a hurricane. Worse, a lazy system, one that parks itself over central Texas and forgets how to leave. I walked out to the edge of the property, barefoot in the grass, and stared across the lake. The moonlight shimmered off the surface like brushed steel. Still quiet, deceptive. The water was low, obedient. But it always starts like that. Inside were my old insurance files, flood claim reports, elevation maps, damage assessments. I used to think I kept them for nostalgia, but that night they felt like prophecy. Page after page of destruction. Every one of them stamped with dates from the same 3-week window, mid-July to early August. 1,995, they had 66 units planned. 53 were already standing. 42 had sold, and not a single one of those buyers had seen the floodplain overlay, because Vivian had dismissed it. Said modern drainage made it obsolete. But the lake wasn't obsolete. It was patient, and it was waking up. 3 days later, the rain began, not in torrents. Not at first, just a whisper of drizzle tapping gently on rooftops, the kind of rain you forget even happened. But by the next morning, that whisper had become a drumbeat, constant, steady, and with it came the shift, not in the sky, but in the ground. The soil around Lake Crestview doesn't scream when it's saturated. It sighs. It loosens its grip. That's how it starts. The earth becomes tired. And under those condos, all that freshly poured concrete, the weariness began to show. I stepped out onto my porch that morning and saw the first warning sign. One of the foundation corners on Unit 14 had cracked. Barely visible, unless you knew what to look for. But I knew. The crew blamed it on a poor pour. Weather shrinkage, routine settling. Vivian agreed. She smiled for the camera crews and said, "Minor setback, nothing we can't handle." But I'd seen this story play out before. Back in '95, it was the same rhythm. Day after day of relentless rain. Groundwater creeping up like a secret. And then, one morning, boom, the water table breaches. Basements become cisterns. Roads vanish beneath muddy rivers. And the ones who laughed at the warnings start whispering prayers they haven't said since childhood. Vivian didn't stop construction. Of course, she didn't. She doubled down. Said the rain was within expected seasonal norms. Had her PR guy post photos of her walking the site in branded rain boots, giving thumbs up like a storm couldn't touch her. Power stance, but the lake didn't care about her boots. The crew brought in pumps, big ones, industrial grade. But the more they pumped, the faster the groundwater rose, because that's how lakes work, especially this one. They don't just hold water, they remember it. And when the lake remembers what used to be there, the original tributaries, the buried creek beds, the forgotten marshlands, it starts to rebuild them, inch by inch. Quiet ones, I'd get phone calls at night. Leo, should we be worried? I never answered directly. I'd just say, look at your foundation. Listen to the earth. She'll tell you everything you need to know. And then I'd hang up, walk to the edge of my dock, and listen. The lake was rising, not fast, not loud, but steady. And it was only just beginning. By the 7th day of rain, even the most stubborn deniers had begun to feel it, not just in their boots, but in their bones. The kind of damp that doesn't just soak your clothes, but seems to live in your lungs. The condos still stood, but they no longer smiled in the sunlight. There was no sunlight, just gray upon gray, sky melting into lake, lake melting into earth. The news still called it a persistent rainfall event. Vivian called it a test of our infrastructure, but I called it what it was, a reckoning. I walked the edge of the property that morning, umbrella in hand, boots sinking half an inch into what used to be grass and was quickly becoming marsh. Unit 27, one of the showpieces closest to the shore, had a brand new sold sign posted just outside its gleaming, oversized window. But inside, the carpet was already wet. I knew because I saw the crew carrying out the pads that had soaked through from below. Water was rising from the ground, not falling from the sky. That's the part people never understand. Rain doesn't have to come in sideways sheets to destroy you. Sometimes it seeps up, quiet and vengeful, like regret. The lake level had risen a full 3 feet, almost silently. The docks were gone, swallowed. My fishing boat bobbed where lawn furniture had been. That stump, the one that used to be a mighty oak, had vanished beneath brown water. And still, construction continued. Vivian wouldn't stop. Couldn't. She had investors, deadlines, television interviews scheduled, a televised ribbon cutting in 10 days. Postponing it now would be political suicide. And she was already measured for her victory speech dress. I watched her that afternoon. Standing beneath a branded canopy as reporters asked questions, she answered with ease. Climate resilience, she said. Smart drainage solutions. Real-time water sensors. The buzzwords flowed smoother than the floodwaters rising behind her. But then I saw it behind her, in the frame of a news camera shot. A retaining wall. Bowing dot, not collapsed yet, but close. It had begun to buckle under the weight of water-soaked earth pressing from behind like a slow-motion avalanche. No one else noticed, but I did, because I remembered the same exact shape in '95, right before the road gave way. She had no idea the earth was speaking behind her, and no one was listening. No one except me. The next morning I awoke to silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that screams, something's gone wrong. No birdsong, no diesel engines, no hammers, clanging, just stillness, thick as fog. I opened my door, and the first thing I saw was my dock, now completely underwater. The shoreline, which had once been 20 feet from my porch, was now kissing the bottom stair. The lake had crept in like a thief in the night. No alarm, no permission, just quiet reclamation. I stood there barefoot, toes in cold, muddy water, and watched as the lake took back what it always believed was its own. Then came the sirens. 2 black SUVs and a county emergency truck barreled down the road, fishtailing in the wet gravel. Men in ponchos stepped out with clipboards and grim faces. Not reporters, inspectors, the kind the city only sends. When something serious has gone catastrophically wrong, I followed at a distance. Just another nosy neighbor. But I didn't have to ask questions. I could see it with my own eyes. Unit 14 had sunk nearly 5 inches on the southwest corner, the one built closest to that prime lake access zone I'd recommended. Cracks split the concrete like lightning veins. The porch light hung at an angle, flickering. The basement was full, and it wasn't just one unit. The engineer, the same one Vivian had overruled, was there, now suddenly the loudest voice. On site, I watched him point out elevation faults, drainage miscalculations, and foundation failures with the fury of someone who knew he'd been ignored. "This whole floodplain's a joke," I heard him say. We told her, she didn't listen. And where was Vivian? Nowhere. Her Lexus was parked under a canopy, but she was gone. Her branded boots were there, neatly placed beside a folding chair, like she'd stepped out of them and vanished. It wasn't until noon that she reappeared, not with press releases or speeches this time, but with silence. She walked the site slowly, like she was seeing it for the first time, hair soaked, makeup ruined, her confidence drowned. She looked at me across the muddy field. For a long time, I didn't smile, didn't gloat, I just looked back. And in that moment, I think she knew it wasn't me who did this. It was the land, the water, the forgotten history beneath her condos, the cycle she refused to learn from. Nature doesn't care about contracts. That night, the rain returned. Not a drizzle, not a passing cloudburst, but a steady, relentless downpour that felt like judgment. By midnight, the temporary access road they'd built for heavy machinery was underwater and impassable. Trucks stalled, mud swallowed tires. One of the model home's AC units was seen floating face down like a casualty of war. Even the porta potties had been tipped and swept into the shallows like little plastic tombstones. Still, no evacuation was ordered. Not officially, but the buyers started leaving. Quietly, one by one. Some packed their luxury sedans in silence, their expressions dark, their glances toward the lake filled with unease. Others made calls to lawyers, insurance agents, realtors, the kind of calls people make when they realize they've just put $1 million down payment on a ticking time bomb. By morning, 5 units were abandoned. A 6th had burst a water main beneath the foundation. Cracks had spread through its floor like spiderwebs. That was the first one they tried to tarp, a futile gesture, like taping a Band-Aid over a broken dam. Vivian tried to regain control. She held a closed-door meeting with the investors. I only know because one of the contractors, a young guy, with sunburned arms and a nervous laugh, told me afterward. He said, "There was yelling. Lots of it. Something about disclosure liability, insurance loopholes, and acts of God." That phrase, act of God, kept bouncing around in my head like a marble in a glass jar, because that's exactly what this was. Not sabotage, not revenge, just nature remembering what we tried to forget. By the 4th day of nonstop rain, the lake officially crested 6 feet above normal levels, 2 feet higher than the last recorded flood, and it wasn't stopping. The pumps failed. First, the backup generator, then the electrical grid. Water began backing up into the storm drains, then into the streets. The luxury units, with their lake-facing basements, were now housing catfish. Vivian tried one last press conference. She stood in front of Unit 7 in a rain-soaked trench coat, flanked by a handful of equally panicked board members, trying to explain how this was a temporary setback in a broader vision of revitalization. But the cameras caught more than her words. They caught the water rising behind her, quiet, steady, rising like an unstoppable tide. It wasn't a setback, it was a sentence, and the land was executing it. By the end of that week, the headlines had changed. What was once Texas's most ambitious lakeside development became luxury condos swamped by historic flooding. News choppers hovered overhead, filming drone shots of units half submerged in angry brown water. Anchors in studio suits struggled to explain how 30 years of flood data had somehow been ignored, or worse, concealed. But we both knew the truth, didn't we? Vivian's empire was collapsing in real time. The investors were out for blood. Insurance companies pointed fingers. The city washed its hands. The HOA board, that once smug panel of suits and smiles, fell into chaos. Resignations, accusations, legal filings, a feeding frenzy of liability and blame. I never said a word publicly. Didn't have to, because the photographs spoke louder than I ever could. They made it into every article, every news segment. That one image of my old cabin nearly swallowed. By floodwaters in '95 became the symbol of what happens when arrogance challenges memory, when ambition forgets history. One morning, maybe 2 weeks into the disaster, I saw her again, Vivian. She was sitting on the hood of her Lexus, parked on slightly higher ground, heels in the mud, phone dangling useless in her lap. Her hair was up, messy now. No makeup, No entourage, just her alone. I walked by with a thermos of coffee and nodded. She didn't return it, just stared at the condos like they were tombstones. They told me it was safe. She finally said, almost to herself. I stopped, let the silence settle like fog between us. I didn't lie, Leo, she whispered. I really thought we had it figured out. The tech, the models. I took a long sip from my thermos, then answered the only way I could. You built in a place that remembers, and you forgot to ask what it remembered. She blinked, looked at me like she was searching for something. In my face, mercy, maybe, or confirmation that this wasn't all her fault. But I had no absolution to give, because some lessons aren't taught by men. They're carved into the land itself, into water lines on stone, into mud that won't forget, and when the lake speaks, you listen or you drown. That's the truth. They never write into HOA contracts. The one clause no lawyer can erase. Mother Nature doesn't negotiate. 3 months later, the development was abandoned. Of the 66 planned units, only 17 had ever been fully finished. All of them were now declared uninhabitable. Mold, structural, rot foundation shifting a litany of problems no homeowner's warranty could fix. The basements, once touted as cool lakefront retreats, were now sealed crypts filled with standing water and bloated insulation. Vivian Sterling disappeared from public life. Rumor had it she fled to Arizona. Dry land, no lakes, no storms, no HOA chairs willing to trust aging men with thermoses and too much local knowledge. But I knew deep down she didn't run from the flood. She ran from the silence that followed it, from the mirror it held up to every decision she made, and me. I'm still here. The cabin's just as it was before all this started. A little more weathered maybe, some shingles torn off, but it stood, just like it did in '95, because it was built with memory in mind, not blueprints, not profit margins, but the quiet understanding of what this land could become and what it had already survived. Sometimes I walk the edges of the lake, especially after a storm. The water's calm now, still, but I don't trust still water anymore. I know better. Still means it's listening, waiting. The bones of the condos remain, concrete and steel skeletons slowly being reclaimed by vines, moss, and time. The Lakeview Grand sign still stands warped, half sunken, leaning like it's ashamed. The locals joke that the place is haunted. I don't argue. Some places are. But what haunts them isn't ghosts. It's memory now and then. New buyers come around. Outsiders, people looking for investment opportunities or revitalization projects. They show up in clean trucks, wear mirrored sunglasses, carry glossy proposals with buzzwords like eco-forward and resilient housing solutions. And if they ever knock on my door, I give them one thing, a photo, the one from 1995. I hand it to them without a word, let them stare at it. Let them feel the weight of water that isn't there yet, but might be again, because I'm not here to stop people. I'm just here to remember. And when the lake comes back, not if, but when, I'll still be on my porch watching, smiling, not because I planned it, but because I didn't stop it. They say every place has a memory, but some lands, they have a will. I've come to believe Lake Crestview isn't just a body of water, it's a keeper, a silent archivist that doesn't forget insult or arrogance. And when the scales tip too far, when concrete replaces trees, and ego replaces humility, it doesn't rage, it waits. That's what they'll never understand, these people with their spreadsheets, their predictive software, their engineered drainage, and reinforced concrete slabs. You can't engineer away consequence. You can't waterproof against legacy. I still get mail addressed to the Lakeview Grand Sales Office, marketing brochures, letters from out-of-state agencies asking if I'm willing to entertain a revitalization partnership. They always include a flyer, rebirth opportunity, hidden potential. Lakefront, living with a legacy. They're right about one thing. There's a legacy here, but it isn't the kind you want on a brochure. It's buried in silt and shame. In the silence of 66 empty structures, no one wants to insure. In the lessons ignored and the warnings dismissed. Sometimes, late at night, I think about Vivian not with anger with awe. She was a force, unstoppable, brilliant, even, but, like all forces that refuse to listen, She met something older, quieter, and infinitely more patient than she was, and she lost. I didn't have to fight. I just had to remember. Because nature doesn't take revenge. It just keeps records, and when it's ready, it rebalances the books. So if you're watching this, wondering if it's real, if it could really happen to you, to your HOA, your lake house, your investment, ask yourself one question. Do you know what your land remembers? Because if you don't, it's already too late. If you want more stories like this, real power plays, hidden truths, and HOA madness that makes your blood boil, subscribe, because this was just one flood. The storm's not done.